Hello.
Hi,
Hi, Haley. How are you?
I'm good. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. I'm very, very happy you're here. Thank you so much for joining today. So just as a quick introduction, firstly to myself, I'm Amy from the social media team at accessiBe, and I'm very excited to be here with you today. Obviously, we've spoken a little bit offline, but if you could just, tell everyone a little bit about yourself, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. So it's wonderful to get to meet all of you who are joining us. My name is Haley Moss. I am an attorney, an author, and advocate, and I'm just really passionate about accessibility, disability rights, and inclusion for everybody. And it really is just so cool to be here with you. Thank you again.
Amazing. Of course. Thank you so much for that. So you mentioned a little bit that you're an attorney and you're an advocate, which is amazing. And I just wanted to know sort of what role has autism played in shaping who you are in your academic career and in your journey?
That is a really great question. So I do not know what it is like not to be an autistic person. So I guess I'm going to just share a little bit about my journey as well. So I was diagnosed with autism as a young person. I was diagnosed at 3, which is largely because I was a non-speaking kid. And when I was growing up, my family was met with a lot of fear. They didn't really know what to expect. And how autism has affected my journey, I know for them, it meant a lot of different forms of isolation and being treated differently. I know for me, it meant sometimes not always understanding things socially, being excluded, not facing a lot of barriers that probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. So when we talk about academics, a lot of the time, the journey that people want me to share with you is being a non-speaking kid and then becoming a lawyer. And that doesn't tell you everything that happened in the middle and all the different people had to face, and that those obstacles typically were not related to autism so much, other people's doubts, inaccessibility. So even when I talk about being in school and being denied accommodations and having to self-accommodate to get through it, or even the way that my peers treated me, all of these different things are barriers that I face. So I always say a lot of the things that autism it forces that overcoming a barrier. A lot of people think I'm overcoming autism, but really I'm just overcoming different forms of inaccessibility, barriers. I wish it wasn't that way, but I also hope that being open is the stigma better for other people. That's really all I can ask for. All that I hope I really can do is make things better for the next generation and for other autistic people. So those same barriers, my experience, don't shape everyone else's, and that we can then say that autism has shaped our lives in much more joyful ways, because there's so much about being an autistic person that I think is amazing, that I don't know how neurotypical people get life not knowing certain things. So I guess that's kind of just my take on it. I'm sure if there's more that you want to talk about, I'm happy to share as well, but that's kind of just a little bit.
No, that's so interesting, and it's so important and amazing that you embrace all these qualities, and interesting that you say that the inaccessibility is of the barriers is not actually within yourself and your diagnosis, is actually within everything outside of that. So it's such an interesting point. When we spoke offline, you mentioned a little bit about sometimes you felt like you were speaking a different language to people, which is really interesting to hear, and I think so many people don't see that side of it. So just like, what did you mean by that?
So what I meant is a lot of being autistic on any given day for me, it's a lot like being from a different culture. And the culture that you're from, you speak differently socially than everybody around you. So I live in Miami, so I use this example a lot, that a lot of people around me, English is not their first. And a lot of the time they apologize to me that their English isn't very good. And what I end up doing, instead of telling them like, well, you should work on that, or this is America, this is whatever, like that's not who I am, is I say, I'm sorry, my Spanish isn't better. Because I should be making that effort to meet someone halfway where they are and their understanding. And a lot of being autistic and socially with language and understanding is we're very harsh when people don't seem to understand the rules that are sort of just built in, that most people just learn almost instinctively. And when you have a different communication style, when you have a different way of existing, people are a lot harsher than we are on that hypothetical second language learner. So I will try to extend some grace, try to understand where we're coming from, and don't be afraid to learn more about a culture and understanding that maybe you might not have thought about.
Definitely. And that's what we're here to do today, to really get this message across. And all of the important advocacy work that you're doing is really just to get that message across. So for sure, that's so important. And more on the topic of your career journey, so how did you get into the advocacy world and become a speaker? You also spoke at the amazingly influential event of TEDx, which, is so many people's dreams to speak there. So how did you sort of get into that world of advocacy?
I got into advocacy by accident, which is always what I tell people, because I had no plans of ever sharing with anybody who was not my family, my employer, my healthcare team, or someone who really needed to know, maybe even a future romantic partner, perhaps, like whoever really truly needed to know that I was autistic. I had no plans of ever sharing. And I was invited to speak at a conference when I was 13 in Orlando, Florida. I selfishly wanted to go to Disney World. Even though I've been 1,000 times, I'm a huge Disney person. Like, I wanted to go to Disney. And I didn't realize that being a 13-year-old autistic girl was something that was so valued, and the experience that I had resonated with people. I was really surprised. And sharing my story had this impact on other folks. I was very confident as a young autistic person because I already knew what made me different, and I grew up with it being accepted in my household. And I was asked about my story and all these things, and I was approached to write a book. I was like, this is the coolest thing that I could ever do. Yes, absolutely. And before I knew it, I was advocating publicly. I didn't know that I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't know any of that stuff. I thought that I was going to be a doctor. If you asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, I would have told you I wanted to be a psychiatrist and help other people with their problems and work on their mental health and understand brains and all this really cool stuff. And then I realized I'm not a science person, so kind of jokes on me there. I became a lawyer because lawyers love to talk, they love to write, and they usually, hopefully, are not the villains of the story and actually can help people, which is what most of us go to law school hoping to. And as far as speaking goes, this is something I've always wanted to do. I love getting to share my story. I started speaking early on like that, and I've always felt more comfortable in front of a crowd than I usually one-on-one or at like a small group setting. So that's a very kind of quirk of mine, I guess. So I enjoy it. I find it very fun. I love getting to educate and gently change people's perceptions. I find it very enjoyable personally. And what really seemed to happen is people resonate, thankfully, and enjoy. And you mentioned the TEDx stage, which was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. I'm very lucky that I got to do it at home at the University of Miami, so go Canes. And I got to work with really fantastic students and community members to help make that event happen. And being on the stage is the biggest adrenaline rush I think I've ever had. You're like, I'm going to enjoy all maximum of 13 minutes that I have up here to share something that I think is cool. And it's going to live on the internet. Like, this is so cool when you think about it. I know it seems very anxiety inducing, but to me it was just a big adrenaline rush. It was like the best roller coaster you can ever go on.
Yeah, to me, I think I'd be terrified, but I know so many people would.
So much that eventually you're like, oh, I know what I'm doing. This is gonna be great. I just have to like plan my outfit, make sure that you don't see like the stage with like the little dot on it until the day before when they have a rehearsal, and you're like, oh my god, this is real.
Oh, wow. Yeah, scary, but I'm sure with practice, hopefully it becomes less scary. And if everyone had your attitude, that would be amazing for sure. No, that's so interesting though to hear how you got into that. And I'm sure being in the advocacy world means that you're exposed to a lot of different people, a lot of different opinions. So if you could change just one misconception about autism, what would it be?
That is such a hard thing to pick because there's so many things that I want to change. But some of the first thing that I would like to change is not just for me, but for all people, is just how perfectly capable we are. And a lot of that comes from the fact that we have this preconception of autism. People are not very smart, that they are weird, that they are not deserving, that they're all non-speaking, or that they're all a little weird. So much that we don't look at the potential and the beauty of who we are because we're so focused on the deficit. So I want to focus on that joy. I also want to focus on the things that just make who we are. And of course, if we can change more misconceptions, I would love to get past that idea of little kids, little boys, little white boys in particular, and really embrace the diversity that society has to offer. But if we can only change one thing, then I'm just happy to start with just how much we have to offer this world.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I saw a statistic now that I think it's 1 in 100 children get a diagnosis of autism. So, I mean, it's such a huge amount of the population, and we really need to start recognizing what that means and providing certain accommodations for those people. So, on that note, do you feel that currently society creates or offers, enough accommodations for people with autism? Do you think that's something that exists currently or is in progress?
Such a great question. And I'm going to start by saying that accommodations are so individual. Like, each person's needs are so unique. There's a saying in the autism community from Dr. Steve, or like, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one with autism. So what works for me might not work for someone else, and so on and so forth. So I try to be very aware of that. So I think there's a lot more to be done, because I do believe that accessibility is for everybody, but also every single person has unique access. There's things that are going to be hard for me no matter what in my life because of autism, but there's things that don't have to be hard in my life that other people and our environments around us are doing. So I like to look at that sort of as a balance. Like, even in a perfectly accessible world, I will still be behind the 8-ball in some way, but there are ways that I do have to be thinking about that if we are perfectly accessible. So it's kind of a give and take, but overall, I think there's a lot more work to do. We're moving in the right direction. There's still a lot more that I would like to see.
Yeah. And also, when we spoke, I remember that you mentioned that, there are things that society can do that makes it easier for everyone, such as, options to take breaks, closed captions, things like that. Is that sort of things that you can see, businesses starting to do more?
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing that I like to remind people about access generally is we look at it as it's just a liability, that's a checkbox to do, it's an afterthought, all of these things. I like to look at access as a way to show people we care about each other.
Yeah.
That it benefits everybody, but it's a form of that we can show that we care. It's not the responsibility of one of us, but it's the responsibility of all of us. So that everybody who wants to participate can. That we're not stepping out of an activity like being here because it's inaccessible. That if you want to be here live, you could just self-select because you're like, you know what, this just isn't for me, rather than I can't be here because something that is going on makes no sense and it is cognitively or physically inaccessible for me.
Yeah.
I like to look at it more of that's kind of the goal. So I do come from that very universal design standpoint of life, if I can. 100%. And so I think businesses also will realize that inclusion and accessibility is good for them. So I'm a big fan all around.
Yeah, I mean, that's also definitely a message that we're trying to get across, is that, accessibility is good for everyone. Like, I watch things with closed captions on because it's also useful for me. Like, it increases the usability of things. So I think that's such an important part of it, is that it's honestly useful for everyone.
I watch everything with closed captions.
Yeah.
So, because especially if you watch TV, I love reality TV. It's kind of my guilty pleasure in life. That I can't usually tell the social cues. So usually I know when I have nervous laughter versus like a sarcastic laugh. And I normally cannot discern that on my own.
Yeah.
So getting the context clue is super helpful, as is the fact that I usually watch things very quiet. They don't want to disturb other people or overwhelmed. And also, I recently watched a Korean drama, well, not super recently, but in the last, called Extraordinary Group, and they did not have dubbing on it, so there was no English voice acting.
Right.
And I enjoy it if it weren't for English closed captions and subtitles. So
100%.
all of these things are people then think. So that's why I love accessibility, is because when one of us gets it, all of us end up getting to benefit.
100%.
Even
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And sort of on that topic of digital accessibility, and as we spoke about previously, there are certain online elements such as, a lot of patterns, loud noises, overwhelming sensory cues that can be overwhelming to people living with autism when they go on a website. So is this something that you feel like is currently being discussed within your community? And is there a specific website element that you find particularly inaccessible?
I think it's something we talk about very broadly in the digital accessibility conversation, but not as much with.
Right.
Lots of bouncing animation. I know this is not the early 2000s anymore, thankfully, because early 2000s websites were a special brand for me. where you would have, you know, all the blinking animations and GIFs and sparkles and really hard to read bright color fonts that would contrast and give me headaches and be sensory overwhelming. But now the things that are really difficult for me is, especially if you're on a consumer-based site and you suddenly get like little chat boxes that pop out, like, can we help you with anything? And you're like, whoa, 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 like, where did this come from? What was I looking at before? I'm so confused. That can be really hard for me. Videos without the captions, like we talked about, and something that really kind of grinds my gears in digital accessibility world is podcasts. And I know that a lot of us love podcasts. We probably listen to them when we're driving, when we're doing things. I do not have the auditory processing skills to listen to a podcast without something to follow along with. That if there is not a transcript or the thing that like each word as they start speaking, I will not listen to your podcast. I'm sorry. I don't say that to be rude. I say that because I genuinely find it accessible. So that's why when we were talking about like TEDx, I love TED Talk because they have the live transcription on their basically transcript. And it's so helpful to follow because you can watch the speaker while reading everything that they say. So you still get sets of cues, at least for me. So that's stuff that I wish that people did more of. And also when you transcribe your podcast, it boosts your search engine optimization kind of benefit anyway.
100%.
Just saying.
And that's something we speak about is, you know, it is also good for SEO and it's good for marketing and it's good for so many business purposes. That's a message we also try and get across.
Get me to listen, which is otherwise a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. No, for sure. But, you know, just so everyone watching can understand, because I know that people don't always know and businesses don't always know, you know, what do you or how do you feel when a website has too many bright features or is overstimulating? You know, would you not visit that site again because you've experienced that?
I will not. I mean, I feel that way about certain stores in the mall of physical space. I feel the same way about websites. Like, either I'm going to be mentally preparing myself for a long time to revisit necessity. Otherwise, I will find something else. Yeah. And it's not that I don't love you or I don't want to learn more. It just becomes overwhelming in ways that it doesn't have to be. Life is hard enough sometimes when you are a person with a disability. Right. It doesn't need to be harder when I am spending time online, and online is home of my community, of my friends, of some of the things that I love the most. And I don't want that to be an unpleasant experience.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's so important. And if you had one piece of advice to give to online businesses that are wanting to become more accessible, what would that be?
Don't be afraid to ask people with disabilities what they need to. So a lot of the time in my life, and this includes online, is that people assume what I want and what I need without actually talking to me. There's a really old phrase in the disability rights community of nothing about us without us. Yeah. And making sure to embody that's really helpful. And there's so many great disabled people who are beta testers, who are working in the accessibility space, that work and consulting with and take those people too, goes a long way. You're doing good work, and also it helps make sure that you're doing things right. You don't want to find out that it's accessible after the fact. You'd rather target as much as you can up front. And also it's good business to begin with. So don't be afraid. We all make mistakes, our own bias, our own ableism. There's plenty of stuff I am learning and unlearning too. But learning from lived experience is one of the greatest things that can happen. I am a big fan of saying we are the experts on ourselves. And a lot of adults with disabilities especially are very willing to share their knowledge and wisdom that they spent a lifetime learning and cultivating with you.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really interesting. And also I saw a recent post of yours on your Instagram where you make a super valid point that businesses often have this idea that accommodations can be expensive or difficult. And you said it's a small investment to have a very important part of the workforce included, which I think is so true and something that we try and get across all the time. And there's so many things that you can do that are simple and easy. And, you know, not to say that accessibility is simple at all. It's always progressing and got a long way to go. But at the same time, there are small steps that you can do. So maybe, I don't know if you could expand on that a bit, because I thought that was really interesting and such a true point.
So I like to look at all of this as it's small things that make a big impact. Yeah. I'm sure that accommodations usually aren't super costly. And at least in the US, your average one-time cost of workplace accommodation is usually $500 or less. The majority of the times it costs the business absolutely zero. And that's a lot of things that can make things more accessible are very individualized. It's stuff that we know best. So for me at work, one of the things that was most helpful is I would wear headphones every day just because I thought it was too loud for me. And I was still able to focus better and do what I had to do. My employer didn't have to do anything to make that happen. They were like, yeah, sure, go ahead. A lot of figuring out how to best work with and accommodate people is just having a conversation with somebody. Sometimes it can be a very vulnerable conversation. Sometimes it could just be very casual. It really depends on the person and your level of trust, your relationship, and so much more. But it's very doable to learn from one another. And that makes me so excited because workplace inclusion is for everybody. That if you want to work, if you are working, you deserve that access and care and ability and potential to just thrive. That you shouldn't just be included as a checkbox of, oh, look, we hired someone with a disability. We have an autistic person here. We're done now. Bye. Like, nope. We want them to stay. We want them to grow into leaders. We want so much more for our community.
Definitely. And I know this is a hard question, but what would a perfectly inclusive world look like to you?
A perfectly inclusive world to me, ideally, we would never have to have any of these conversations because we all prepare. But a perfectly inclusive world to me would be a lot more empathetic and better communicators. Because I think that's a lot of what, when we look at accessibility and ableism and all that, it's a lot of very bad communication and also just antiquated systems. And if we actually try to understand where another person is coming from, why they feel the way they do, I think we would get a lot further. So for me, one of the first step in that perfectly inclusive world is really learning and not being afraid to be vulnerable and empathize and realize something we don't know. And it's okay not to, because there's plenty of lots of experiences even in the disability community I am never going to have. And that's okay. So all I could do is learn and try to imagine what it's like to be that other person.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it can often be daunting trying to understand accessibility and understand all the parts of it. But as you said, it's just about making a start. It's just about the progress that we're making and just learning best practices. And, you know, that's the best place you can start, and just listening to other people. So, yeah, I totally agree. And if you have one, or if you could pick one motto to live by, what would it be?
I would want to live by something that I've been thinking a lot about. So I had the pleasure of listening to a non-speaking autistic advocate by the name of Elizabeth Bonger, and in her viral commencement speech at Rollins College, she mentioned that life is for service. And I believe she got that from Mr. Rogers. Please correct me if I'm wrong, buddy. But I love this idea of life is for service, because that's what we really are doing. We're just trying to make the world a better place for ourselves, for the people around us, the people who are going to come after us, that really we're just here to serve other people. And that, I think, is a good thing to live by, and realize that, you know what, this world is a lot bigger than whatever goes on in my own little brain.
Definitely. And, you know, your passion for making a difference is so amazing and so important. And I really hope we can just get that message out there, because it's so important to, you know, provide access and inclusion to everyone. So, you know, on that note, Hayley, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We appreciate it so much, and for sharing your really important message with everyone and with businesses, and just getting that message out there. So we can't wait to continue working together. And, you know, to all the viewers, thank you so much for listening, and we really hope that you found this conversation valuable. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for celebrating Autism Acceptance Month, Autism Appreciation Month, or Autism Awareness Month, depending on how you like to look at it. So I'm glad that we got to do this, and thank you for highlighting my community.
Thank you. We'll speak soon.
Sounds great.
Thanks. Bye.